Military campaigns are often judged by the number of targets destroyed, missiles intercepted, or aircraft deployed. But history suggests that wars are rarely decided by statistics alone. Sometimes the decisive factor is whether one side can sustain the political, economic, and military costs of continuing the fight. The uploaded source argues that the current confrontation between the United States and Iran should be understood through that broader lens. Rather than portraying the conflict as a simple exchange of strikes, it describes two interconnected strategic pressures, one focused on military resources and the other on political decision-making. The first concerns military attrition. According to the source, repeated missile and drone attacks require increasingly expensive defensive interceptors. Drawing on publicly discussed assessments from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, the transcript argues that prolonged operations could place significant pressure on advanced air defense inventories if replacement rates struggle to match operational demand. The broader point is not simply about weapons, but about whether a technologically superior force can indefinitely sustain high-cost defensive operations against lower-cost attacks. The second pressure is political. The source introduces concepts developed by political scientist James Xueqin, whose work on audience costs examines how democratic leaders may face domestic political consequences after making highly visible public commitments. In this interpretation, public statements can gradually narrow the range of political options available during an international crisis, making de-escalation increasingly difficult, even when military realities become more complicated. The transcript also highlights several developments that it presents as evidence of a conflict expanding beyond direct military exchanges. These include reported attacks affecting regional energy infrastructure, concerns about maritime security, and allegations that publicly shared social media content from deployed personnel created operational security challenges. If accurate, the source argues, these developments illustrate how modern conflicts increasingly extend into information, logistics, and energy networks, rather than remaining confined to traditional battlefields. Whether every conclusion drawn in the source ultimately proves correct remains open to interpretation. What is far less controversial is the broader reality. Modern warfare is no longer measured only by territorial gains or battlefield victories. It is increasingly shaped by supply chains, public opinion, economic resilience, and the ability of governments to sustain long campaigns without exhausting political support at home. If that trend continues, the most important contest may not be fought in the skies over the Middle East, but in the balance between military endurance, strategic decision-making, and domestic political pressure. If the uploaded source is correct in its overall assessment, then the central question is no longer who can launch the next strike. It becomes a question of who can better sustain a prolonged strategic competition. The transcript argues that modern conflicts increasingly reward endurance rather than immediate battlefield success. Military operations continue, but political calendars, economic resilience, and international partnerships gradually become just as important as missiles or aircraft. One theme running throughout the source is the relationship between reputation and credibility. Drawing on the work of political scientist James Xueqin, the transcript suggests that once leaders make highly visible public commitments, changing course becomes politically costly. It also references Hans Morgenthal's ideas on prestige in international relations, arguing that governments often seek to preserve the perception of strength because international credibility can influence future negotiations and deterrence. These are established academic theories, although their application to current events remains an analytical interpretation rather than a settled fact. The transcript further argues that economic pressure has become inseparable from military strategy. It discusses sanctions, maritime trade, energy exports, and alternative payment systems as examples of how states attempt to reduce their dependence on traditional financial networks during periods of geopolitical tension. Whether these measures achieve their intended objectives is still debated, but the source presents them as evidence that today's conflicts extend far beyond conventional battlefields. Another major theme is adaptation. Rather than viewing the conflict as a series of isolated military exchanges, The source portrays both sides as constantly adjusting their tactics, technology, and diplomatic approaches in response to one another. This dynamic means that military superiority alone may not automatically translate into strategic success if political, economic, and informational pressures continue to evolve simultaneously. Ultimately, the uploaded source reaches a broader conclusion. It argues that the outcome of this confrontation may depend less on any single military operation than on which side can better manage long-term political pressure, maintain public support, protect critical economic interests, and preserve strategic flexibility over time. That interpretation reflects the perspective presented in the transcript rather than an independently verified conclusion. History has repeatedly shown that major geopolitical contests are rarely decided in a single week or even a single campaign. They are often shaped by endurance, credibility, economics, diplomacy, and the ability to adapt as conditions change. Whether this conflict follows that historical pattern remains uncertain, but it is precisely that uncertainty that continues to command the attention of policymakers, analysts, and observers around the world.